Washington Journal continues.
Joining us now, Ilyse Hogue with NARAL Pro-Choice America. She is their president. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We're here to talk in part about the decisions made by the Supreme Court last week. First and foremost with Hobby Lobby. What happened? What's your perspective on it?
Well, my perspective is one of disappointment, but also I'm disturbed. I'm disturbed by it. I think what we saw were 5 male judges essentially say that discrimination against women is not discrimination at all. What happened is that the court decided in favor of a private corporation, saying that our religious beliefs trump the civic duty we have to provide comprehensive health care for all of our employees. This was coming on the heels of already the administration and the country acknowledging if you are truly a religious institution, you are exempt from this. You can do your own ideas about what your healthcare looks like. But if you're a private corporation, we all have to play by certain rules in civil society, and this is one of them. We're going to provide comprehensive healthcare. Hobby Lobby was one of dozens of companies that said, actually, I'm not going to. I'm not going to provide certain kinds of contraception.
For specific, right? That dealt with abortions specifically, that caused abortions.
Well, they don't, which is, I'm glad you brought that up, because it was an interesting piece of the case that not that many people know about. Every single medical expert in the country agrees that these 4 kinds of contraception, your viewers will be very familiar with most of them, IUDs, Ella Plan B, do not actually incite abortion. What they do is prevent fertilization. What the justices essentially said during the oral arguments is the medical science, the facts are of no consequence legally in this case because we're talking about someone's belief system. So there's no way for us to adjudicate what they believe, even though all of medical society had lined up and said, but the facts are flawed. The facts are flawed. So they said, no, we're not going to provide these kinds of contraception. And the court said, unfortunately, you don't have to. Why it's disturbing is because what it essentially says is women's health care is different than other kinds of health care. And in this instance, for women's health care, my boss gets to decide what I choose and don't choose, even though it's my earning. We have to remember, and your viewers know this very well, our insurance coverage is part of our compensation. It's not something they just willingly provide. In fact, Hobby Lobby enjoys a very nice tax break. The taxpayers are paying Hobby Lobby to pay its employees health insurance. And so essentially it's punished the female workers. It set off a domino effect because the very next day we had other corporations say, well, you know what, I don't want to cover contraception at all. And it starts chipping away at what every doctor in the country says is basic women's health care.
Part of what Justice Alito wrote is this: our decision in these cases is concerned solely with the contraceptive mandate. Our decision should not be understood to hold that an insurance coverage mandate must necessarily fail if it conflicts with an employer's religious beliefs.
He did write that. We will see, right? One of the things that happened immediately after the case was handed down was a number of employees wrote a letter to President Obama saying, hey, just so you know, if you actually pass an executive order that says I can't discriminate in my employment against gay and lesbian people, I intend to file a religious claim saying that that is against my religion. So I think the court tried to say this is a narrow ruling, but they didn't prevent anyone else from coming back and saying that what they were saying is this ruling only applies to contraception. But they don't prevent anyone else from coming back on the religious grounds. And they did set a precedent, a very frightening precedent that says, you know what, that building over there that you think makes widgets, it actually has a spiritual belief, and it may be different than yours if you choose to work there, but it trumps yours. And that's part of what I think people are finding so disturbing about this is we do value religious liberty in this country. Our country was actually built on it. It's what makes our democracy thrive.
But wouldn't only certain types of businesses fall under that? Not every widespread business would fall under that idea of a religious belief system.
What the court ruled in this case is that it applies to all closely held corporations, which is not a matter of size. It is a legal structure, and it actually covers 52% of our economy. It just means that the majority of the shares are held by a very small number of people. So your viewers will be familiar with closely held corporations like Cargill, like Koch Industries, like Toys R Us. These are all closely held corporations. So the sweeping effect is pronounced based on this ruling.
So in essence, what's the worst case scenario?
Well, the worst case scenario, I don't think we've seen the worst case scenario actually, because what we know is immediately many women will lose access to some kinds of contraception, which many of them have been using for quite a while and see them as instrumental to their health. What I think we're going to start to see is, with the establishment of this precedent, people will file religious claims on behalf of their companies. We might see people saying, I don't want to hire gay people. We might see people saying, you know what? HIV medication is against my spiritual belief. Vaccines are against my spiritual belief. And the court will now has set a precedent that it will have to hear those cases because it's granted that these companies can, in fact, hold spiritual beliefs.
Do you know if there are cases in the lower courts that possibly would fall into this mandate working its way up the Supreme Court?
Not yet, but I think, well, there are definitely cases in the lower court that go beyond the 4 kinds of contraception, that just say, I don't want to cover contraception at all. And then I think what we'll start to see, because of the message the court sent, is more. And then we saw this letter from the employer saying, hey, if you sign ENDA, I'm going to use this court case to say it's against my religious beliefs to hire LGBT people.
Ilyse Hogue, our guest, to talk about the Supreme Court decisions, not only in Hobby Lobby case, but other cases as well. If you want to ask her questions on it, 202-585-3880 for Democrats, 202-585-3881 for Republicans, and 202-585-3882 for Independents. Our first call is from Derek from Stillwater, Minnesota. Independent line. You're on with Ilyse Hogue. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a question. Okay, so knowing that obviously you're pro-choice, it's in your name, so I'm going to assume that. But knowing that men are now the minority in this country and women make up 53% of it, technically the minority doesn't have a voice in this. Example is obviously if two people have sex and somebody decides to have an abortion, why is there no choice for the man in that side of the equation, and would you support that? Thank you.
I think we're seeing an enormous amount of equality for men in this country. In fact, one of the things that was noted widely is that Hobby Lobby does cover things like Viagra and other erectile dysfunction drugs, while it's refusing to cover contraception, which, as we know, is actually the way that we reduce abortion in this country, is by providing as much access to contraception at all. As to the caller's question, I think that what we do see is enormous numbers of couples making this decision together. But I also think that, the law is clear on this, and women do have the ultimate choice. And when they're denied contraception, they're denied the entire range of choices that stops us from getting to the place your caller is talking about.
Jack up next. Providence, Rhode Island, Democrats line.
Yeah, good morning. I am calling concerning this issue here. I'll never forget, I have a 23-year-old daughter. She was born in December of 1990, and at that time, sonogram technology was there, but, it wasn't that good. And I remember seeing my daughter in the sonogram, her body, moving around, small little thing. And that conclusively told me that there was a life over there. All right, now I'm a pro-life Democrat, and what I don't like is going on here is the Democratic Party. I only voted Republican once, and it was for Ronald Reagan. I voted for him 2 times. The Democratic Party has been taken over. It's not for the working man anymore, even though I'm a retired stock and bond broker over 30 years in the business. It's been taken over by an elite, very wealthy elite, primarily located in Manhattan and Los Angeles. And she's got a little smirk on her face right now. I'm looking at it.
So, caller, what would you like our guest to address?
What I want to address is this. That's a good question. That conclusively, with the advances in sonogram technology up to the year 2014, is definitely a life, and she's smiling, and you're snuffing it out.
We'll let our guest respond.
One of the things that is really interesting that the polling data shows is that 7 in 10 Americans across the board, whether you're talking about South Carolina, Kansas, or nationwide, support the rights that were enshrined in Roe versus Wade. There's a whole host of reasons for that. One of the things that we know is that when abortion is made illegal, the number of abortions don't go down. Actually, the number of deaths and injuries to women go up. Some people just don't believe that government should be involved in our most personal decisions. But that actually spans both parties. It's a really interesting dynamic that we see, that every ethnicity, every age group, every party, there is still a majority of support for women and with our partners and our doctors to make our most personal healthcare decisions. And I'm from Texas, so I'm very familiar with all the different kinds of Democrats and Republicans. But I thank your caller for his call. He's certainly entitled to his opinion. We all have opinions. I think the question is what the law should do in terms of taking the caller's opinion and imposing it on other people. And the law is very clear on that. The law is clear that this is a privacy issue, that women with our doctors and our families only we know our own individual circumstances, and that's why it protects us to make our own personal health care decisions.
Fredericksburg, Virginia, next on our Republican line. Lowell, go ahead.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. Ms. Hogue, you know, it's terribly disturbing to watch the disposition of all of the youth in the United States. In fact, sex seems to be something that people who no longer even have it need to pay. And I understand both sides, but I certainly look at Hobby Lobby as standing up for their religious rights, where if you were a Muslim, we and the right in the nation would be totally for a Muslim having any kind of desire he had and supporting that. I raised my children with God in their lives, and it should be respected. And my daughter, Alexandra, at 21, if she needs to have contraception, then I would hope that it would be only after she was married, not before. And I know that that's no longer the moral and ethical stance of the people in the United States, but it should be. And for a person who attempts to do the right thing in life, and their parents raised them properly, to have the ideas that our grandparents had about morality and ethics that we want to instill in our children. I don't want to take up any more of your time, but what I want to say is that if you are moral and you are ethical, then it seems like you should be patted on the back rather than made to feel the fool.
It sounds like the caller has a lovely family, and I applaud him for it. People in this country have all sorts of different attitudes and different kinds of partnerships, and that's the diversity that makes our country wonderful. I think what is challenging about the Hobby Lobby case is it does actually reject medical science, that these kinds of contraceptions are used for all sorts of conditions, including preventing unintended pregnancy, including for married people. It's a funny thing to note that the IUD is actually used for married people, used disproportionately by married people who feel like their family size is what they've chosen. So it sounds like the caller has a lovely family, but I think it's not pursuant to the case, because if you actually want to make a case that Hobby Lobby should be consistent, the question of why they're not covering contraception that is used by married people, single people, people with medical conditions, people who want to avoid unintended pregnancies, but they are covering Viagra, Cialis, and the other kinds of drugs, that's a really relevant question in this case. And that's what leads us to the fact that it is a discrimination against one class of people, and that's women who work for Hobby Lobby.
You used the phrase 5 male justices at the beginning.
Yes.
That was part of your response, according to National Review, which wrote about your response to the decision. But they also added a bit of Justice Kennedy's language in his writings. They said this. He said this: "It's important to confirm that a premise of the court's opinion is that the assumption that the HHS regulation here at issue furthers a legitimate and compelling interest in the health of female employees." Kennedy wrote, although the court didn't explicitly hold that the regulation furthers a compelling interest. National Review goes on to say that Kennedy pointed out that the government has already admitted by coming up with a so-called accommodation that it could devise a less restrictive way of furthering the interest than by using the contraceptive mandate. Did they take the wrong approach as far as Kennedy's argument?
Well, it's a very interesting thing, just to sort of lay it out even and put a finer point on it. What Justice Kennedy is arguing is sort of different than what your callers are arguing. Justice Kennedy is saying it is in the best interest to provide contraception for women across this country for medical reasons, to control family size, all of the above. But because the government had already said for religious institutions and religiously affiliated nonprofits, we can figure out another way to do it, he was arguing it's less onerous on the government than it is on the business. What's fascinating about that is that the very next day they issued a series of emergency rulings, including the one on Wheaton College, that shows that they actually don't have to abide by the very accommodation that Justice Kennedy
And for those who may not be familiar with the Wheaton College ruling, essentially what is it?
The Wheaton College ruling said you don't have to cover this at all right now. And that was not, you have to find a third-party administrator, which is what the government argued. And so basically, you know, we're getting into the legal weeds here, and I had to study up hard on this, but the people have said, oh, but that means that the accommodation will stand, because the accommodation, of course, we'll hear at the Supreme Court next session. However, two things about that. It doesn't necessarily say that, because all Justice Kennedy is saying is the burden is on the government to show that they have said this is the least restrictive way to accomplish their goals, in this case, providing contraception. This is not the least restrictive way, in Justice Kennedy's opinion, because they've already shown there's another way. And the accommodation is up before the Supreme Court, but with the Wheaton ruling, they've sort of tipped their hands the very next day that, you know what, the accommodation may not stand either, so we're back to square one, which is unequal health care for women than for men in this country.
Frank lives in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He's on our independent line with Ilyse Hogue of NARAL. Go ahead.
Hi, yes. I wanted to ask you about the religious component in this whole argument, which you've been addressing from the pro-choice side. You know, at Notre Dame University, there was there were some people who didn't want Obama to speak there a number of years ago because of his views on abortion. Some of the alumni got pretty mad. Meanwhile, at Georgetown University, Obama spoke over at that school, and they covered up the Christian cross, which was in the backdrop. I sided with Obama in Notre Dame, but I was basically against them putting a white sheet over the Christian cross, because I figured if Obama's going to choose that venue, then he's got to put up with the institution, which includes the Catholic Church that he's at. And to a certain extent, I sympathize with the ruling, because I figure it's very similar in this case to it. Could you comment on that?
Well, I'm not familiar with the case of Georgetown, but I do know that our president is a Christian, so I can't say anything more than that. I think the point that the caller is making about religious liberty is a very important one. As I started to say earlier, it is a value that our country was founded on. It's what makes our democracy thrive. But I think what we've lost track of is that religious liberty means two things. It means that I don't have to do anything I don't want to do because of my own personal faith, and the government can't force me to do that. However, I don't get to force anyone else to do anything that they don't want to do because of my personal faith. So I don't get to tell my employees what to do. And that's what keeps our religious liberty thriving and makes sure that we have the kind of diversity in our democracy that we actually value and that we've fled religious persecution from. I think, what's happened in the Hobby Lobby case is that the owners of Hobby Lobby can say, this is not right for my family. This is not what I want to do for my family. But when you are a private corporation who enjoys the tax breaks and the benefits of being in America and being in the democracy, you're expected to play by a certain set of rules. And part of those rules is I don't get to impose my religious beliefs on my employees because I am a private corporation, and they've just broken those rules, which really does endanger religious liberty. And I think that's why we saw a lot of people of faith speaking up. There were a lot of preachers and reverends who said this is not a victory for religious liberty. This is actually a scary defeat for religious liberty and the kind of religious liberty that we value in this country.
A viewer of Twitter says, isn't the real problem government mandating, i.e. forcing companies to provide specific coverages? Shouldn't it be the customer's choice?
Well, in this case, it would be the customer's choice. The government has a compelling interest in making sure that the health insurance plans that, again, taxpayers are subsidizing because the corporations get tax breaks, are comprehensive enough that it actually affects everyone equally. Every employee should have equal access. Then they can choose to use it or not, right? But they have to have access to an equal level of coverage that in their health insurance plans. And in this case, that's exactly what this is doing, is not making it unequal. What Affordable Care Act did, and did so well, was actually say, we all do better. We do better economically. We do better from a health perspective. We do better from a civic perspective when we include the most amount of preventative medicines, preventative treatments possible. And that's where the contraception got covered, because it is a preventative treatment. If you already have the family size that you feel like you can afford, that you want, it prevents unintended pregnancies, and this coverage actually, or this case actually flies in the face of that.
There's a story from ABC News saying that more than half of privately insured women are already getting free birth control under the health care law.
Which is a great step forward.
So as far as if that's already happening, why is Hobby Lobby still a concern, even if it's just in a limited amount of companies involved?
Because in America, we believe that there is a compelling reason for everyone to get the baseline, right? That people shouldn't be excluded simply because of where they work or where they live. It's sort of like what we did with the civil rights laws. You don't have different voting rules just because you live in the South. You don't have different health insurance rules just because you're employed by this private corporation and not this private corporation.
Helen from Maryland. Hi there. She's on our Democrats line.
Hi. I'm Helen, and I'd like to say thanks to C-SPAN for this opportunity to talk about Hobby Lobby. I am a big customer of Hobby Lobby, and I'm going to stop being a big customer of Hobby Lobby. I am pro-choice. I have a religious background. However, I think they went to the Supreme Court, got a judgment for something that leave that judgment to God, because what Hobby Lobby is doing right now, they're deciding what people can do in their homes with their families. Hobby Lobby should be doing that for their families, and they are making enough money to do whatever they want, but the employees are not. And if that was part of their coverage in the past, because it just happened that they can stop doing it, but if that was part of their coverage, perhaps Hobby Lobby need to increase the pay for these employees so that they can get the contraceptive that they want. And also, if they're not getting it from Hobby Lobby's payment, they're going to get it out of the taxpayers' pocket in order to cover whatever contraceptives that they want. And my last comment is Hobby Lobby is making this judgment on contraceptives when majority of their products in their store happen to be made in China. China have the worst human rights and the restriction of how many kids you can have, and I'm sure they're doing something to prevent that.
Helen, thanks.
I think the caller is making a point that a lot of people are frustrated about, that there's a lot of inconsistencies in Hobby Lobby's claim that this is a deeply held spiritual belief for them. The caller pointed out that Hobby Lobby actually had the contraception coverage before they dropped it in order to file suit. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that their pension funds are invested in the very manufacturers of the contraception devices that they claim to be morally opposed to. So, I think that, as I understand it, is legally inadmissible in the case. However, I think it's very frustrating to a lot of people who believe it goes to motive, that if Hobby Lobby was truly infusing its business as it claims to with these spiritual values, neither of those facts would be true, because they would be so opposed to these kinds of contraceptions that they wouldn't have had them in the first place, and they certainly wouldn't be invested in them as a company.
From Pennsylvania, this is Richie on our Republican line for Ilyse Hogue. Hi.
Yes, good morning, guys. I'm a pro-choice Republican. I'm also a paramedic with 25 years experience. I just want to re-educate you guys that back in 1973, 9-male Supreme Court said that abortion was legal, and there's also Planned Parenthood for all people, not just women. For example, if a guy wants to go get tested for testicular cancer, he can utilize birth control things. So it's not just for women. That's why I support Planned Parenthood also. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Richie. You're absolutely correct. It was 9 male justices who decided Roe. And, I think the point that the caller is making, first of all, thank you. You are a dwindling breed, as I understand it, a pro-choice Republican, although there used to be many, many. The point that the caller is making is that the the reproductive health field is large, and it includes an enormous number of services for both men and women, including contraception devices that are used for a whole host of conditions, including avoiding unintended pregnancy, but not exclusively that, and that these decisions about when and how to use these devices and access reproductive health care should be left to the individual, their family, and their doctor as necessary. And I think that's what we're disturbed by in the Hobby Lobby case, is it extends the boss's reach from the boardroom into the bedroom, into the most private decisions of their employees, which feels sort of counter to what we believe in America.
The co-founders of Hobby Lobby, David and Barbara Green, went to microphones after the decision to give their thoughts. Here's what they had to say.
The Supreme Court reaffirmed what our family has always believed, that America is a country founded on and sustained by religious liberty. It's been a long journey, but an important one for our family and for those who wish to be guided in all areas of life, including their businesses, by faith and conscience. We are truly thankful for a decision that allowed us to continue operating our family business according to our principles. And one of those principles is gratitude, and we are deeply grateful to our employees, to our customers, to the many, many individuals from all walks of life who have shown their support through word, action, and prayer. We thank God for his many blessings and ask for his continued grace to shine on our nation.
Ms. Hogue, any thoughts?
No, I think that, again, there's a one-sided understanding of religious liberty, which is my religion, my liberty. And what we're seeing is that, their employees aren't being afforded the same right, a right that we hold true in America, that an employee who says it not only doesn't go against my morality, but it's actually instrumental to my way of life to be able to access full reproductive health care coverage, they're being thrown by the wayside.
So when you hear thoughts of Tom Keller on Twitter, who says this, he says, how is Hobby Lobby forcing their views? They are just not paying for it. Employees are perfectly free to get their own items, right?
So the kinds of devices that are in question with Hobby Lobby are roughly amount to a month's pay for a low-wage worker. That's a lot. And it's certainly a lot for people of the means of the Hobby Lobby founders and the people we just saw to say, oh, just go out and get it. The other problem with what Tom Kellogg has to say is actually Hobby Lobby is benefiting from the tax breaks from taxpayers who are saying, you're going to give your employees health care coverage, so we're going to subsidize your company to do that because we believe in that. So you can't have it both ways. One of the things that we were watching that the court could have chosen to do was to say, this is not a substantial burden on your religious liberty because you can just choose not to give your employees health care at all. There's a penalty for that. It probably is about the same as what they're paying for the health care, so it's not a financial burden on the company. So they could have just chosen not to give their employees health coverage at all. The employees would then be free to go to the exchange and get it on the open exchange, have full coverage. They're not even offering their employees that option. They're basically saying, okay, male employees, you're going to get everything you want. Female employees, even though you're paying the same copay, you're paying the same with your labor, you're only going to get what I tell you you can get.
Laura, up next from Pennsylvania, Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning, folks. I just wanted to say I'm a nurse practitioner in women's health, and I am very pro-life. Ms. Hogue opened this part by saying that these are not abortifacients when you talk about IUDs and things that prevent implantation. I guess she's not aware that most people, even religious people especially, that espouse do not kill innocent unborn babies, that when they began was when the sperm met the egg. And that is when they consider a new human life, because that's a new human DNA. It's not the mother's. It's another human person beginning to grow. So anything that prevents that baby to continue to grow and have one choice at life, that is what they were espousing. And I don't think it's just about religious liberty. It's about science also. I was watching Cosmos, and they were saying, scientifically we know it's when the sperm meets the egg. And I wonder, how much does Planned Parenthood make as a profit each year? Could you tell me that?
I don't work for Planned Parenthood, and I don't keep track of what their their business model is. I do know that they provide an enormous amount of subsidized or free health care to women and men, as the previous caller said, that otherwise would not have access to it at all. And, you know, the caller is totally entitled to her religiously based belief that life begins whenever she believes it begins. The point that I was making earlier is it's not my opinion, it's actually the American College of Gynecologists, it's the American Medical Association, it's all of the medical experts that line up and say that there is a scientific definition of abortion and that that's not what these contraception devices do. The court said that was inadmissible for the same reason your caller is saying, I believe it. And in religious liberty cases, they are judging belief, but that doesn't make it scientifically true. In fact, we've got all the medical experts saying it's not.
Because you brought up Planned Parenthood, is it safe to, could we say that if insurance or employer doesn't provide these certain type of contraceptives, they could go to other means, women could go to other ways to get them, whether they be through Planned Parenthood or state programs or other ways of getting?
In some places, not in all places, and certainly we're facing a crisis in this country where clinics are being closed down. Women in my home state of Texas are having to travel hundreds of miles for reproductive health care. So, you know, the Hobby Lobby case is just one piece of a long-term and very sustained effort to chip away at women's ability to access reproductive health care, to make our own decisions about what's best for us. So there's an expense piece to it. So as one caller said, if the companies aren't going to pay even though they're getting a tax breaks, then if women can find it, then you've got the taxpayers paying. So the taxpayers are actually paying twice for Hobby Lobby to be able to hold its religious beliefs in this one case, again, where it didn't have it before and it's still got its pension funds invested in the same manufacturers.
Sandy from Michigan on our independent line. Good morning. Sandy, are you there? Oh, sorry. Got to push the button first. Sandy, good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. I just wanted to say, on this case of the Supreme Court against Hobby Lobby, they did not say that a woman could not have contraceptions. All they said was she couldn't have it for free. Now, if I'm an atheist and I don't believe in contraception, it doesn't have anything to do with my religion. It has to do with the fact that I have to pay for somebody else to sleep around. And I don't like it. I never did, and I don't expect that I should have to pay for somebody else that did. Thank you.
You know, one of the things that the caller just said is a very common misconception, and that's that this is free contraception. Our benefits packages, including our health care benefits, are part of our employment. It's what we pay for when we go to work every single day. And in fact, that's where the sort of discrimination and unequal justice comes in, because the men who work at Hobby Lobby, who are paying for their health care with their labor, are actually getting everything that they possibly could want, including Viagra, if they choose to sleep around or if they choose to use it in their marriage. The women, and again, IUDs, which is one of the birth control in question, is disproportionately used by married people as a very reliable device, are not getting that same benefit, even though they're working as hard and as long, even though the company's getting the same tax break. So this is an argument that I've heard a lot. It's not free. It's not necessarily for people to sleep around, although it would be nice if we could all judge each other's behavior. It's for medical concerns beyond preventing unintended pregnancies. It's for married people to choose their family size. It's for single women to make sure that they don't have families before they're ready. So that is, as I said, the medical experts and the government believe that there is a compelling interest, including Justice Kennedy believes that there's a compelling interest in making sure that these resources and these medical services are available to women who have paid for them themselves with their labor.
Glenda lives in Pennsylvania. Democrats line.
Hello?
You're on. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to know if Hobby Lobby pays for vasectomies.
I don't know that for sure, but I don't know that they don't. What we do know is that they pay for Viagra, which has been sort of the comparison. I actually don't know if they pay for vasectomies, although we have no reason to believe that they don't because they are typically covered in many of these healthcare plans. But I just honestly don't know.
A second decision made by the court dealt with free speech zones. Could you, in Massachusetts,
Yes.
could you tell the viewers what happened?
Sure. The week before Hobby Lobby was decided, there was a court decision that came down that said that the protective buffer zones around reproductive health clinics in Massachusetts were no longer constitutional, that what had been put in place by public safety officers who were routinely dealing with people being harassed, threatened, intimidated, screamed at going into clinics, were that those could no longer stand, and that there would be access to those women as they were entering the clinics, their families, by the protesters who are almost always there on Saturday
How did the
morning.
justices decide on this?
The justices decided on free speech grounds, which, we found really...
It was unanimous, right?
It was unanimous, yes. It was 9-0, and it did leave in place other kinds of buffer zones that we have around the country. So there's one in Colorado that has already been upheld by the Supreme Court. What was interesting about this one is that the speech in question was not being impeded. In fact, you had people going to the clinic saying, "I can hear you just fine. I'm just going to continue unimpeded to my appointment inside the clinic." And you have a buffer zone larger than this around the Supreme Court, which became quite a talking point, but also around polling places. And we've seen it at political conventions where protesters are asked to stay a certain length back from the delegates going into the convention. So we have a history in this country of balancing free speech with public safety. In the case of Massachusetts, the reason that
And there's a photo here in the
place,
Boston Globe. It shows a gentleman behind the yellow line. He sounds like looks like he's almost pushed out to the street as far as the free speech zone is concerned.
it was 35 feet. The buffer zone around the Supreme Court is about 252. The buffer zone around polling places is about 100 feet. So, we do have a history in this country of balancing free speech with public safety. In the case of Massachusetts, the Attorney General asked for the law because people had been murdered in the clinics, and that's sort of gotten pushed aside in the wake of this case. But people had been routinely harassed. The tension was rising, and one day somebody walked in and shot people in the clinic. And so they said, "We got to do something. We can't protect public safety." And the Supreme Court said, "Not this way, not here." And we're disappointed, but there is a lot of attention going into replacing that law with one that more closely prescribes to the ones that have already been upheld by the Supreme Court, because there is a compelling interest in protecting both the doctors and the clinic workers as well as the people going for their appointment.
Let's hear from Brad from Texas, Republican line. You're the last call. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Actually, it's Brett. But anyways, it's not a big deal. I just want to say that I'm glad we can have an open forum here. I do know for a fact that Hobby Lobby does cover 16 types of birth control that are FDA approved. The 4 contraceptive or methods that the Hobby Lobby is against and will not cover is the Plan B, the Ella, the copper intrauterine device, and the IUD. And the reason why they're morally opposed to those 4 is because they believe, according to science or their studies and their understanding, is that these pills or these contraceptives actually have the ability to possibly harm or kill a human that is growing inside of the female. And where I think we're getting off track here is it seems more like we are arguing about free stuff rather than contraception and the health of women. Because, they do offer 16 different types of birth control.
So, we've already covered the fact that regardless of what Hobby Lobby believes, the medical establishment says this does not actually disrupt pregnancy or life as medical people understand it. It is true they cover 16. The very next day, what we saw were companies saying, I don't want to cover any of these. So that's part of this slippery slope. But even if you cover 16 but not 20, that's sort of saying, I'll cover these 16 drugs, but the one that works best for you, I'm deciding you don't get. So there are very specific reasons that women and families choose these specific devices. They're medical reasons. They have to do with how our bodies react to things. And so it's not mix and match. That's like saying you walk into the pharmacy and let your pharmacist decide what's best for you, not your doctor, not yourself, not your own experience. And that, I think, is what's so disturbing to people, is we live in a country where we actually trust individuals to make our own personal decisions. And in this case, the court failed us. Hobby Lobby gets to make our personal decisions. And we're going to keep fighting to make sure that women all have access.
Does this become an issue in the 2014 midterms and to 2016, absolutely. And how much so?
Well, I can't speak to 2016 yet. We're just trying to get through 2014. But I do believe it is going to be a huge issue. I mean, the outrage that we've experienced on this in a country where 99% of women use birth control at some point in our lifetimes, where families depend on it, you've got a real marginal feeling that has prevailed that's basically like, I know better than you, better than your family, what you should do with your personal life. And that's just not the way most Americans think. And I think that they're going to be looking for an electoral remedy. And I think, this just it furthers the idea that Republicans are out of touch with what women and families need in this country.
Ilyse Hogue, the president of NARAL Pro-Choice America, NARAL.org, the website if you want to find out more about the organization. Ms. Hogue, thank you.
Thank you.